Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Simon Marks, live in Washington, D.C. And these are the headlines of this Thursday. A South Korean lawmaker claims North Korea is poised to conduct a nuclear test, with the United States warning it could come as President Biden visits Seoul this week. Massachusetts reports a rare case of monkeypox in a man who recently travelled to Canada. Health officials are looking into whether it's connected to small outbreaks in Europe. The first Russian soldier on trial for war crimes in Ukraine asks for forgiveness in a Kiev court after he described how he shot dead a civilian in the opening days of Russia's invasion. Israel's ruling coalition became a minority in parliament after a lawmaker from a left-wing party quit, leaving Prime Minister Naftali Bennett with an even more precarious grip on power. Sri Lanka defaults on its debt for the first time in history as the government struggles to halt an economic meltdown that prompted mass protests and a political crisis. And more residents in Shanghai were given the freedom to go out and shop for groceries for the first time in nearly 2 months, as authorities set out more concrete plans for exiting the citywide COVID-19 lockdown. We begin here in Washington today, where President Biden, in just a couple of hours' time, will head to Andrews Air Force Base, board Air Force One, and head off to Asia on an alliance-boosting trip. The president's belated first travel to the region will see him making 2 stops, South Korea and Japan. Biden will spend 4 days in the 2 friendly nations. He will touch down in Seoul on Friday, where he'll hold a meeting with the newly elected president, Yoon Suk-yeol. The tensions in the Korean peninsula will be palpable, as North Korea is reportedly preparing for an underground ballistic missile test that could take place right around Joe Biden's visit.
With respect to the issue of North Korea, we've said from this podium, we've said at the State Department, and we've indicated in quite clear terms that our intelligence does reflect the genuine possibility that there will be either a further missile test, including long-range missile test, or a nuclear test, or frankly both, in the days leading into, on, or after the president's trip to the region. We are preparing for all contingencies, including the possibility that such a provocation would occur while we are in Korea or in Japan.
The White House says the president will not be visiting the demilitarized zone that separates South Korea from the north. They say he's been there before when he was vice president. And in Tokyo, Biden will meet for bilateral talks with the country's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, followed by a meeting with the leaders of Japan, Australia and India in a gathering of the Quad partnership. Joining me now from New York, our correspondent in the Big Apple, Susan Tehrani. She's live there for us again today. Susan, how much is at stake for Joe Biden in this trip? It's a trip to the Asia-Pacific region that comes at a time when the United States is interested in deepening engagement there and, of course, trying to combat Chinese expansionism.
Right. The trip really does come at a critical time. On the one hand, as you mentioned, it really aims to send a signal to China that after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it should create a pause if it has any aspirations for saber rattling in the Indo-Pacific region. And then, of course, you have the nuclear threat of North Korea. But on the other hand, you have two of America's strongest allies in the region, South Korea and Japan, that don't necessarily get along with one another. And one of the challenges would be to try to hope to get these two countries to come closer together, which is home to about 80,000 U.S. troops. That might be a challenging task for President Biden. He hopes to do the same in the Indo-Pacific region as he did in Europe with NATO, sort of bringing those countries closer together in the onset of the Russia invasion of Ukraine. On the other hand, you really have South Korea's aspirations of joining the Quad again because Japan is part of the Quad. That might be easier said than done. And then there is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which, President Biden will also be meeting Quad leaders in Japan, and they have this Indo-Pacific economic framework in mind as well. One of the criticisms for that is that it's very ambiguous. So he'll try to sort of push that agenda as well with all the economic problems that he's facing at home. And of course, he'll also hope to talk about the supply chain issue facing the United States, the global community, the issue of COVID, and also trade between these two countries as well. A lot at stake, but of course, the issue of threat and security from China and North Korea topping the agenda.
Well, Susan, when he flies out of American airspace, he will be leaving a right old mess behind him. I mean, you've seen the financial markets in turmoil over the last several days. There's still this lingering problem of a national shortage of baby formula in the United States. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the broadcast. There's also the delayed action on Capitol Hill to pass the president's request for more financial assistance that can pay for weapons and humanitarian aid for Ukraine. I mean, he's leaving an enormous number of problems behind him as he heads off to Asia.
Absolutely, and at a time when his polls, he's polling at an all-time low. Really, confidence not only in the president but the administration is at an all-time low in handling crises and managing the country. So, this trip overseas, on the one hand, might provide some sort of a distraction, but on the other hand, President Biden has often tried to use his foreign trips as a selling point for the American people, saying that he looks outwards to solve America's problems inside. As we've seen, he's often blamed, the inflation and the price hikes on the war between Russia and Ukraine. He's called it the Putin price hike. He's blamed the supply chain crisis, which partly is true, on the pandemic and China's policies, zero tolerance policies on COVID, so on and so forth. So he may use this trip as saying that, he's going there to solve some of these problems. But, jumping ship perhaps at this time and focusing on a trip outwards might not be the best possible solution. But on the other hand, we did hear Anthony Blinken, even after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, calling China America's gravest threat in the 21st century. So you have to wonder whether or not this pivot to Asia and the threat of North Korea is something that can be, not taken seriously either. But I think it's safe to say that President Biden's problems at home and abroad are wide and large.
Susan Tehrani, WION's correspondent in New York, live for us there today. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. One of those problems is, of course, America's issue of mass gun violence. And as if to underscore that, gunfire rang out near Philadelphia's Temple University, injuring 5 people on Wednesday night. A suspect was caught with the help of university police, but a second shooter is at large. The victims were 3 women and 2 men, including a 28-year-old male who was shot 14 times and is currently in extreme critical condition. It was not immediately apparent what sparked the shooting. Temple University is on the edge of a pretty gritty neighbourhood in Philadelphia, and the university believes its students were not caught up in the events.
We know as the officers arrived on scene, they chased two males who were fleeing. One of the males was believed to have tossed a gun as he was being chased by police, so we currently have two people in for investigation at this point. We do not have a motive.
Gun sales in America have tripled in the last 2 decades, and the legal sales have risen sharply as well. According to new figures from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, also known as the ATF, the total sale of guns has risen from over 3 million in 1986 to over 11 million in 2016. What is especially concerning is the rise in the number of ghost guns. Those are built by 3D printers or assembled from kits. The production of ghost guns rose to over 1.3 million in 2020 from just over 30,000 2 decades ago. Imports of firearms have also seen a rise in the last 2 decades. The ATF says imports have more than quadrupled to 6.4 million in 2020, from 1.4 million 2 decades earlier. That includes 4 million handguns. US President Joe Biden has called gun violence in the country an epidemic, and his administration has tried to implement some modest gun control laws that would widen background checks on gun buyers. The White House has also called for a ban on assault-style weapons, but there is no impetus for any action on that in Congress. While gun sales are on the rise, baby formula is disappearing from American stores. Many parents have been left struggling to access the product they rely on to keep their babies and infants fed. President Joe Biden has invoked the Defense Production Act to expedite the import of the product from approved manufacturers, just days after the White House dismissed the idea, saying it wouldn't make a difference over the short term. The White House confirmed that the US will import baby formula on military contracted planes, and the plan is named Operation Fly Formula.
The Defense Production Act gives the government the ability to require suppliers to direct needed resources to infant formula manufacturers before any other customer who may have ordered that good. And I'm also announcing Operation Fly Formula. That's to be able to speed up the import of infant formula and start getting more formula in stores as soon as possible. I've directed the Department of Defense and the Department of Health and Human Services to send aircraft, planes overseas to pick up infant formula that meets U.S. health and safety standards.
The baby formula shortage was triggered by a product recall. Abbott Nutrition, which is responsible for 40% of American baby formula supplies, had to shut down its factory in Michigan over bacterial contamination fears. The FDA has now approved the resumption of production there, but experts believe it could be another 2 to 4 months before normal supplies resume. And the United States relies on domestic suppliers for 98% of its baby formula. Parents and infants and newborns have grown increasingly desperate, accusing the White House of failing to act in February when the industry warned of impending shortages. The issue is turning into a huge political liability for President Biden and his fellow Democrats ahead of the November midterm elections. Republicans have targeted the Biden administration and Democrats over the issue. The shortage, along with increased inflation, is likely adversely to impact the Democratic campaign in November's congressional polls. Now, the US soccer men's and women's national team players have come to an agreement to receive equal pay and prize money. It has been a long time in the works.
In what has arguably been its hardest-fought victory, The U.S. women's soccer team on Wednesday won its years-long battle for equal pay with the men's team after the two struck landmark agreements with the U.S. Soccer Federation. The crowning achievement of the deals? Equal prize money for the team's respective World Cup tournaments, a first among all countries in the world. Cindy Parlow-Cohn is president of U.S. Soccer.
It's truly a historic moment for U.S. soccer, for soccer in general. We do have two separate contracts because there are a few differences that the women wanted and the men wanted. But they include identical game payments, pooling and sharing of all prize money, including World Cup prize money. We're the first country to ever do that. And revenue sharing that will be the same for both teams.
The agreements come 3 months after the women's team and U.S. Soccer agreed to resolve a dispute dating back to 2016, when some female players filed a federal wage discrimination complaint claiming they were paid less than male players even though they generate more income for the U.S. Soccer Federation. The women's team is the most successful team in international women's soccer, having won 4 World Cups. The U.S. men's team has never won a World Cup.
I said months before we actually got them in the room together that this deal would not get done without the men's players and the Men's Players Association coming together and working with the women's PA, the women's players, and U.S. Soccer. And they have absolutely done that. And I think this deal just shows what we can really achieve if we all work together.
The collective bargaining agreements run through 2028, covering the next 2 World Cups and Olympic cycles. The U.S. Soccer Federation said the deals will keep the athletes among the highest paid national team players in the world.
Now, a man from Los Angeles is trying to spread awareness on proper waste disposal, and he's doing it by wearing trash bags. This is his story.
So this is a specially designed trash suit because the average person creates about 5 pounds of trash per day. This needs to be able to hold on to a lot of weight. So today's day 27 and I'm up to 63 pounds of trash on my body. Nice. Great. This is day 27. So for most of us, trash is out of sight, out of mind. We throw it in the garbage can and it goes away and we never think about it again. So I want to create a visual that helps people to really see how much our trash adds up. 1 month. Yep. Yeah. Have a nice one. Trash that I personally created in the last 27 days. Oh, there's the line.
The European Commission has unveiled the RePower EU plan. It's much easier to accomplish than to say, aimed at rapidly reducing dependency on Russian fossil fuels and speeding up the green energy transition. The plan calls for an additional investment of $220 billion by 2027. The Commission is proposing a set of measures including energy savings, diversification of energy supplies and the accelerated rollout of renewables to replace fossil fuels in homes, industry and power generation.
Our plan is to rapidly reduce our dependency on Russian fossil fuels by really fast-forwarding the clean energy transitions. On the targets, we raise the target for the share of renewables in 2030 from 40 to 45%. So your aim that you declared here today to significantly increase the wind power in the North Sea by 2030 will also contribute to this objective.
The European Commission has proposed short-term behavioural changes to save more energy. In other words, telling people to use less of it. Specific communication campaigns are going to target households and industries. That new plan projects that the energy industry could save up to 35 billion cubic metres of natural gas by 2030. The Commission will consider a legislative initiative to increase the share of zero-emission vehicles in public and corporate car fleets. It will also present a package aimed at greening freight transportation. Meanwhile, the World Meteorological Organization is warning of oceanic acidification, which is definitely not what the planet needs. They have provided details on oceans recording high acidic levels and heat last year.
Oceans reached their hottest and most acidic levels on record in 2021, and melting ice sheets pushed sea levels to new heights. That's according to a report from the World Meteorological Organization. It painted a stark picture in its annual global climate report, with Secretary General Petri Talis laying out the numbers.
It used to be about 2 millimeters per year 20 years ago, but recently we have seen 4.5 millimeters per year sea level rise, which is a record so far.
Atmospheric levels of climate-warming carbon dioxide and methane also surpassed previous records, the report added. And with last year's global average temperature 1.11 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average, the world is inching closer to the 1.5 degree threshold. That's where the effects from warming are expected to become drastic, warns UN Special Advisor Selwyn Hart.
Without much greater action and much greater ambition, much greater urgency, we are about to lose the narrow window of opportunity to keep the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement alive.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres called the report a failure of humanity. The latest UN climate assessment warns humanity must drastically cut greenhouse gas emissions. With energy prices going up and European countries trying to replace Russia as an energy supplier, Guterres said the conflict in Ukraine is only making matters worse.
The war in Ukraine and its immediate effects on energy prices is yet another wake-up call. The only sustainable future is a renewable one. Time is running out.
The WMO report said the ocean warmed significantly faster in the last 20 years. That trend is not expected to end anytime soon, and the organization warned the impacts of that change could take centuries or even millennia to reverse.
Finally from us today, the American pop superstar Taylor Swift has achieved a new title. She can now officially be referred to as Dr. Taylor Swift. We'll leave you with that story, and I'll see you again soon here for another edition of WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. Stay with WION. World is one.
By virtue of the authority vested in me, I am pleased to confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Fine Arts, honoris causa.
I am elated to be here with you today as we celebrate and graduate New York University's class of 2022. I'd like to thank NYU for making me, technically, on paper at least, a doctor. Not the type of doctor you would want around in case of an emergency. Unless your specific emergency was that you desperately needed to hear a song with a catchy hook and an intensely cathartic bridge section. I hope you know how proud I am to share this day with you. We're doing this together, so let's just keep dancing like we're the class of 22.
This is right, Arab.